Hi, I'm Kenny Potter, president of ECS Publishing Group, and today I am excited to be with Kyle Pederson, rock star of the choral world. And today, Kyle, first of all, hello, glad you're with us.
Thank you. Always awesome to talk with you, Kenny.
Yeah, as well with you, Kyle. So I wanted to take a few minutes, and this is going to be going out to obviously on our website, but also to our subscribers. An opportunity to get to know you a little bit more. We did a video a few months, maybe even a year ago, about vision unfolding, and we'll talk about that. But you have many other pieces as well that we have in the catalog or are coming out. So I'd like to start with Morning Star, which is our church music publisher. And I just wanted to know more about your thoughts about Come By Here, Be Thou My Vision, as well as Sanctus.
Yeah, I love all three. uh, so I think one thing that all three of those have in common is that they are an iconic melody or hymn or text. And whenever I set something that's iconic like that, I try to always have the question in my mind, how might I approach this in a way so that this hymn or text or melody might speak in a different way, in a new way, maybe in a way that would interest people who maybe weren't interested in other settings of this particular text or melody. And each of these pieces that you mentioned are kind of different answers to that question of how I might approach it. So with Come By Here, lovely text, super recognizable melody, and this invitation asking God to be with us when we're praying, when we're crying, come by here, Lord. So I wanted to pair that with my conviction that God is not just present when we request God to be, but that God is always present, that God's Spirit is moving in and through and around us in whatever circumstance we're going through, no matter what the world throws at us. So the middle of the piece, I think, is really the heart of this setting. And it's a cascading section where each part sort of takes turns suggesting some area of life in which God's Spirit is moving. So it goes from morning and waking to evening and sleeping and dancing and sharing and supporting and loving and living, and in our grieving, in our sadness, in our crying, in our dying. And at the end, the whole choir comes together after that cascading section and says, in all of this, you are here. So that we both invite God's presence, but we also recognize that God's presence is already with us. Another sort of interesting thing about this piece, I think, is the pianistic sort of improvisational piano part, which is super fun for me as a piano player to play. So those are a couple things that occur with that piece. Be Thou My Vision, fun fact about this one, it started off just as a piano arrangement. It was the very first piano arrangement I did of a hymn for my own wedding back in 2008.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, and it wasn't meant to go any further than that. But then I decided to make an album of my piano stuff. And then a choir director out west got a hold of that and said, you know, I really like this setting of Be Thou My Vision. Would you consider making it into a choral anthem? I was like, well, sure, I'll give that a shot. And my answer to how it might speak differently for this particular piece is that I took it from a normal sort of 3/4 meter and I added an extra beat, almost all the measures. So it's now a 4/4 meter piece, which I think actually gives it more space. It allows it to be a bit more contemplative, which I think is helpful. The text is also brand new. Part of the text is it was written by a good friend and fellow church musician of mine, Hant Hansen. He wrote the first verse. I wrote the second and third verses. And this vision that we're asking God to guide us to is one of compassion and grace and unity and inclusivity and love and hope. Another interesting thing about this piece, I think, is the ending. In the ending, we actually provide a choral, a blessing that a pastor of mine always sort of says at the end of his messages. And that blessing is, may God be in my mind, may God be in my heart, may God be on my left, may God be on my right. And it's been interesting how different choirs have included that in their singing. The piano part just kind of loops and continues. It's the progression, the modern sort of progression that loops underneath. And some choirs have all repeated that in unison as they sing. Others have had a representative from the choir or a pastor speak it over the congregation. Some have asked the congregation to speak it with them. Others have included movement, like making the sign of the cross as they speak. Others have foregone that blessing, but have included their own narration or scripture passages. So it's really been an interesting opportunity for choirs to sort of co-create and join in that making music together. Sanctus, let's see. Sanctus is my hope there is to combine the oldness, the ancientness of that text that's a part of the Latin Mass. And there's some old elements, and the old elements include the Latin. It includes some chant-like motifs throughout. There's an organ part that's included. So it sounds oldish in that regard, but then I wanted to juxtapose it with a very modern sound as well. So the harmonic progressions throughout are very contemporary, and these little motivic bits float in and out like a contemporary modern song might. And it's got a sort of a moody piano part also. And there's little bits of holy, holy, holy that float throughout over and in the piece. And so sort of mashing those together, I sort of wanted the listener and the singer to think, I'm not sure if this sounds old or if it sounds new, but I dig it, and let's go ahead and sing it. Another thing I might add about this piece is that it can sound great as a very small chamber ensemble. I think there's about 8 parts, 8 divisi parts when all is said and done. But it can also sound really full and fleshed out if you have a whole choir. And the commissioning and premiering choir, Transept, which is the recording that's on the ECS website, includes both. It's a very small consort that starts singing, about 8 to 12 members. And as the motivic bits are added, and as we're ready to fully experience all the parts layered and stacked together, then they bring the rest of the choral ensemble in, about 30 or 40 voices strong. And it's just this massive wall of sound, which is a cool way to approach this piece.
That's cool. And with my church choir, I've done both Come My Hear and Be Thou My Vision, and they both work really, really well. We chose for a representative to do the ending blessing.
Very cool.
And it works really well.
Good.
Shifting gears, A Vision Unfolding, it's being sung all over, both as a whole work as well as the extracted movements. For those people that might not know this work, just share a thought or two about this piece that might make people want to go and check it out.
Yeah, thank you. It's a 5-movement, genre-bending SATB work. It comes in at about 25 minutes or so, broadly based on themes of social justice. There's spoken word that's threaded throughout that connects the movements together. The music texts are by Langston Hughes, Walt Whitman, contemporary poet Robert Bodie, Chanel Gabriel. I even took my hand and wrote one of the movements. And we cast a vision for how we might live better in community, where justice, freedom, compassion, inclusivity, things like that are central. Instrumentation is for piano, optional snare drum, violin, trumpet, and hopefully a more fleshed out orchestral version coming in a few months. There's a variety of styles in the piece. There's influences of pop and gospel and blues, and of course, traditional choral, and spoken word transitions they're provided. So New York City poet and singer-songwriter and artist Chanel Gabriel wrote these really evocative, powerful spoken word transitions that you can take and use as is to thread the movements together. But choirs are also welcome to create their own, to really make it applicable to their situation. So we've had some choirs who have used some of the spoken word transitions and have also included multimedia projections. We've had some that have included their own poetry and own spoken word that they've created, and some that have taken speech excerpts from famous speeches in American or world history. So that's an option too, to sort of co-create and to make this come alive in their space with their people in a very real, relevant way.
And this work was done last month in Carnegie Hall and is going to be done next April again in Carnegie Hall, conducted by Lee Nelson. Am I correct?
Indeed.
Yes.
That was an absolute thrill to do it with you last month at Carnegie, and Lee Nelson is going to be doing it in April, and we're looking for choirs all over the country to come and join us. So please consider that.
That's great. That's great. And that's with Manhattan Concerts.
It is, yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. Great. Do you have any stories? This is kind of a off topic, sort of. You have any stories of people performing your music that you are like, wow, that's really cool, or wow, that's really random? How did they get the music?
That is a fun question, and I don't know if anybody has asked that question before. So let's see. What occurs to me? Well, it's tough to beat Carnegie in terms of special places. So that was a thrill. I also got a couple of nice emails 5 years ago and then last year, where a couple of choirs did a couple of my pieces at the 75th and 80th anniversary of the D-Day invasion at Normandy, France. And so that was a really powerful thing. I had a chance to perform there with my own college choir, Augustana University in Sioux Falls, back for the 50th, way back in the day. So to be able
Yeah.
to have been there and then to have my work sung there 25 and 30 years later, that was a pretty awesome honor. In terms of random places, that's a fun thing to think about. I have gotten a few emails from singers, they're almost always high school or college singers, who have recorded themselves singing one of my pieces in a bathroom or in a stairwell, where the acoustics are particularly
Yeah.
resonant and it bounces off. And I remember when I was a student also doing that all the time. You'd go into the bathroom where you've got all the tile and things would ring, and that was super exciting. So it's always fun for me to get that kind of email. And a couple choirs have done something in a grain bin. There's a grain bin, I don't know if it's in Ohio or someplace else, where they actually offer it out to area choirs to come in and experience the acoustic, and I didn't know that was something, but it's a kind of a fun entrepreneurial idea for that grain bin owner.
Yeah, that's random. Yeah. Wow, that's cool though. In our last minute or two, what pieces can you think of that people might not know as well that you're like, they really need to check that out?
Yeah, well, thanks for that question. Several pieces came out right during the pandemic where all choral pieces went to die for a
Sure.
while. So
Sure.
there, a few come to mind. If you have a really good baritone soloist that you'd like to highlight, I've got two pieces similar-ish in style. One is called My King is Coming Soon. Another is How Sweet the Sound. They're both a cappella, though How Sweet the Sound also has a piano option to it. And it sort of blends influences of gospel and blues and rock and the spiritual as well. Stories from scripture and making them come alive in a new sort of really exciting way throughout. My King is Coming Soon even incorporates a little spoken word that the whole choir gets to participate in as well. So those are two good options if you've got a baritone soloist. Reconcile is getting some good traction, and it's a piece, sort of a pop ballad style piece that explores how we might reconcile with somebody or a group of people with whom we have a broken relationship. Pretty darn relevant to what we're experiencing today in society. And it asks us to sort of explore what it might look like, sound like, feel like, to engage in that process of reconciliation. One of the cool things about this is that when I designed this piece, I designed it for all sorts of different choirs and levels and voicing. So there is a SATB, there is an SAB, there's a treble setting, there's a two-part, a unison, and they're meant to be sung both independently, standalone pieces, but they're also meant to be combined. So if you have a youth choir that you'd like to come join your SATB community choir, you can all sing your own versions in your own concerts and then come together and sing what you're used to singing together. They will actually mesh and sound like it's meant to be that way. Or if you've got a treble choir that you want to join your SATB choir, you can mash those two together as well. So that comes to
Yeah.
mind. And then maybe a couple Christmas pieces, since it's never too early to start talking about Christmas, Kenny.
Mhm.
I've got a really fun arrangement of God Rest You Merry Gentlemen that has piano that's rocking, that adds an optional bass and drums and a violin that squeals around in sort of an Irish bluesy sort of way. It's really fun, full on energy, features a soprano soloist who can really bring the house down. And then I really enjoy my arrangement of O Come Emmanuel. And this is a bit unique in the space because it is a mashup of the original, sort of the text and the melody that people would be used to. But then the piece starts with sort of a chant-like, ancient, vibey, modal Latin setting with original music, so a new melody that introduces the piece, and then it comes in with the traditional carol that people recognize. And then the third verse mashes them together like I love to do. And I really think that this comes together in a pretty compelling way. It's piano, optional organ, and it's got a really movement forward cello part that's optional as well.
Very cool. That's great. And you have given us lots to think about and to explore. So thanks so much for spending time with us today. And everyone, go to the website, go to our YouTube page, and check us out, our YouTube channel. Thanks so much, Kyle, and we'll be talking soon.
Thanks, Kenny. Appreciate it.
All right.